This episode is brought to you by Tekto Gear, TEKTOGEAR.com, a Portland, Maine-based tactical knife company. The knives are created by the CNC process to provide the best precision, functionality, and beauty. The Tekto Gear knives won't cost a half month's rent either. Today, Tekto Gear is giving 15% off the entire purchase. Go to TEKTOGEAR.com. Use the discount code STRIPES. That's STRIPES. Go to tektogear.com and use discount code STRIPES and save 15% off your entire purchase. And welcome to another Fast Take Military Matters. I'm Rod Rodriguez.
I'm Jack Murphy.
And Jack, we are at the season finale, the end of the road.
Pretty wild history in the making. Reporting on it in real time as it happens. Not always the easiest thing in the world, but it made for some interesting radio, didn't it?
It did. It was really strange. I remember this season kicked off back in March, and when we were planning this season, we didn't really do any of the stories we had planned. We had these ideas of what we were going to go do and talk about this season. And I think we had a couple that we did make it into this. A couple did make it into the season, but
we were talking about doing, there's going to be like a deep dive on Russia.
Yeah.
But it was going to be more from like an academic perspective. And then that rapidly turned into like covering breaking news.
Yeah.
I mean, we still talk to a lot of Russia experts but I mean, we were covering things like that were actually like, this is no shit happening now. You know, it's not theoretical. It's not academic.
Which brings us into the last episode. So what I want to do is let's talk a little bit about the last episode and then we'll fast take the whole season. But the last episode we talked about was NATO and nukes. And, some of the reaction I've gotten to NATO and nukes is it's from two sides of the spectrum. And in one sense, I got a lot of folks saying, hey, thanks, because I really didn't know much about NATO. The other side of that is, how did you not know this about NATO? There are some really smart people out there, but I find there's a generational gap. And that's where I'm getting some of the differences here. And we were talking about this pre-recording. I am a child of GWAT. I'm a global war on terror guy. My whole career, I came in 2000, finished basic training. And by the time I got to Germany after AIT and all that good stuff, it was around 2001. Shortly after I arrived in Germany, September 11th. So at that point, everybody's lives just flipped. No matter what branch you were in, what you were doing, your MOS, your life changed that day for sure. And it all became about the Middle East. It became about Afghanistan, Iraq, and everything just kind of ballooned out of there. NATO, despite the fact that I was stationed in Germany, NATO was never really a thing for me. I came in after Bosnia. So you have to excuse me, folks. If I'm coughing, I'm a little wheezy. I got COVID like everyone else. But NATO was not that big of a deal for my generation. Now, generations before me, Fulda Gap, the Russians, Soviet Russia, communism, the spread, blah, blah, blah. Big deal for those guys. For my generation, it's been about, religious extremism, and the Middle East and ISIS and Al Qaeda and Osama bin Laden and all those things. Russia was almost an afterthought. In fact, I was told many times in my career, like, oh, they're our guys now. They're allies. They're cool. And then they weren't. So if you're an older generation, you knew about NATO. You knew about why it was there, but my generation didn't know anything about it. Or most of us didn't. So that was the point of this episode, was to talk about what the hell exactly is NATO. Why is it there? What's the difference between the UN and NATO? Which is, I thought, talking to these super smart guys, I was like, man, these guys are going to think I'm an idiot for asking this stupid question. But I really appreciated their patience with this knuckle dragger. They were very cool about like, hey, man, let me explain why that's important, because a lot of people don't know the difference, and nuclear capabilities, nuclear options that are on the table. Russia, obviously a nuclear superpower. So what does that mean for NATO? What does that mean for Europe? Uh, my question throughout that whole episode was if they've got their finger on the bomb. So here's Putin finger hovering above the bomb. Can he do whatever he wants as long as he hovers the finger over the bomb? He's like, don't make me do it. I'm going to go over here now. And if you stop me, or if I see a Western influence, I swear to God, I'll just punch and kill everybody. The conclusion, it seems, was like, yeah, like, yeah, as long as he hovers the finger over the button, he can get away with quite a bit. But the question really came around, maybe not about nuclear weapons, but about uh, nuclear power plants that are all over Europe. There is a huge one. Well, we got Chernobyl, which is right there in Ukraine. We've also got a couple of other nuclear power plants in that area. I think there's one in southern Ukraine. Can't remember. It starts with a Z or an S. I'm sure my editor is going to love that. He's going to be doing his fact finding. Like, God dang it, Rod, which is it? So sorry, Brian. Jack, NATO nukes. What are your thoughts on it?
I mean, yeah, no pressure. Thanks, Rod, for throwing that one in my lap. That's kind of a big topic.
Solve the problem now.
I mean, I think you're right. 9/11 absolutely sucked us into the vortex of the Middle East, that we got trapped there in that kind of quagmire, even though several administrations tried to pull us out and we just kept going back, right? There were conversations through the 90s and the early 2000s about NATO's relevancy. Like, what do we even need it for? And maybe that conversation sort of came to a head during the Trump administration, where he'd be like openly talking about like withdrawing from NATO and saying what these countries don't pay their fair share and all this sort of rhetoric. This sort of move seemingly towards isolation and away from allies and away from security alliances. All that evaporated quite quickly when Putin invaded Ukraine, and now NATO is going to have two new members, in Sweden and Finland. It's just a question really now of when they're going to join, not if. They seem to have cleared the major hurdles. It seemed we're already doing like bilateral military training exercises with the Finns. We work closely with them anyway. What we'll probably see in the future is working even more military training exercises and sort of the interoperability between these new NATO partners and the rest of the alliance. And also you may see, like, it's become an interesting thing that we don't really think about, is strategic military reserves that exist throughout Europe, that we scaled down the amount of troops we have in Europe, but we left these reserves of war material so that if war ever broke out, we can rush troops from the United States to Europe, and they can then pull out these reserves there are maintainers that are just like maintaining trucks and tanks and missiles and all this kind of stuff, combination of Americans and local contractors. And we have pulled a lot of those reserves out so that we can move them to either pre-position them for American forces in Germany or Romania and other places. So we'll probably create some of those strategic reserves in new NATO nations as well. As far as the nuclear issue, I mean, I don't see Putin quite as much of a recluse. I mean, what you're describing is sort of like what Kim Jong-un does. Like, I'm so crazy, I could push the button at any time. Like, you better cave and give me whatever I want. And so he plays this sort of like fait accompli, this sort of like game of chicken. He wants you to think he's crazy, right? Because the crazier we think he is, and the more likely it is that he presses the button, the more likely we are to give him whatever he wants, right? And what we've seen with Putin is that he has been able to rewrite the rules. We went from Moscow rules in the 1980s to, as a senior CIA officer, Jack Devine, told me in an interview years ago, now we have no rules. It's like this guy just has done whatever the hell he wants, from poisoning Russian defectors with radiological weapons. I mean, that's not a mistake. That's because he wants us to know that it was him. Doing all these sorts of things, messing around all over the place, screwing with our elections in the United States, or at least trying to. And the question is, we never really clapped back. We never really pushed back. I mean, when you're getting bullied, you have to punch back at a certain point just to like get your point across, or like, are you getting the message? And 10 years ago, maybe we could have balled up some FSB agents in Vienna, shoved them into a car trunk, and just drove them out into the middle of a cornfield and left them there. And not to hurt anyone, it's just say, hey, like, we're getting a little irritated with what you're doing. But as far as I can tell, we never really clapped back until actually during the Trump administration. We started to do some stuff. And even some of the people I know won't fully tell me what it was that we did. I think, though, that you can look at Montenegro and Macedonia and some of the attempted coups and Russian meddling that was averted there as potentially some places where we pushed back against Russia. But nonetheless, as we talked about, I think on military matters, Putin had his own trajectory, it seems, and COVID isolated him, and he did a lot of reading, lots of reading, a lot of like Russian QAnon type reading. And he believes in this sort of Russian magical realism and that they're going to have this empire. So we're not necessarily dealing with somebody who is entirely rational here. But do I think that he could press the button? I don't think he's that irrational. I mean, he has to understand mutually assured destruction. Like, you start lobbing nuclear weapons around Europe, there's going to be repercussions for that. And I do know we are monitoring to see, does it look like he's going to mobilize nuclear weapons? And if he does, there will be repercussions. I think I'm just stating the obvious when I say that, right? That if he did press the button, so to speak, that we're going to be living in a very different world the next day. And it doesn't mean that there's going to be, the end of the world, or like nuclear apocalypse, and that there'll be a full exchange of ICBMs that we're going to empty our silos. But there could be a limited exchange of tactical nuclear weapons in Europe. But I mean, nonetheless, we would wake up the next day in a very different world.
I think that's the part that gets me, is mutually assured destruction. Mad, right? They launch a nuclear weapon. We launch a nuclear weapon. Now they've got to launch one or two, and then we're going to launch three or four. Nobody's going to give. Once you drop one, it's just escalation after that. The only way not to do that is to be the country that doesn't retaliate nuclear. But I wonder if this country, with its current, I don't know, hive mind, our current community mindset, can allow an administration to not respond nuclear. Would they forgive a president who did not respond to a nuclear attack with a nuclear response? Because that's the only way to not escalate, right? Is to say, like, nope, we're not going to do that. We're not engaging you in nuclear war.
Well, not necessarily. So if they launch a nuclear first strike, by you launching one back at them is not an escalation. You are just meeting the new threshold that they have set. But let's say the Russians launch a nuclear weapon at like one of these cities that they're trying to take in eastern Ukraine right now. They launch a nuke to clear the way for their ground forces to come in and just take that area. And then in response, we launch a nuclear weapon, tactical nuclear weapon against like a Russian military base right across the border. That would kind of be like a tit for tat. Now, if we launched a nuclear bomb at like Moscow, that would be a pretty big escalation. That's like taking it to the next level.
But the tit for tat, when that attacking a small military outpost right over the border, wouldn't that prompt them to attack us?
Potentially.
That's what I mean. Like, that's what I'm saying. It's like, it just doesn't seem like there's a way where there's a safe off ramp for anybody.
Well,
And I
yeah,
haven't
and
seen
it's never been tested before,
right,
right? It's all
exactly.
theoretical. It's all based on like game theory.
And I
No
haven't
one.
seen Putin want to take off ramps lately. Like this man is like off, he doesn't see them.
Um. Well, I mean, you're right, and like I said, he's not entirely rational, but he's not. Is he entirely irrational? Like, let's ask ourselves the question: why hasn't he used nuclear weapons yet? Because he knows that there's consequences of doing
That's
that.
right. Yeah.
Um. And I don't think, even though like on the Russian tabloid television, they have pundits and commentators talking about like, oh, we're going to nuke New York City. I mean, it's just one of the many crazy things that they say on Russian television every day, but we haven't seen them, to my knowledge. Okay, we're gonna get in things. I'm gonna get in trouble with our editor at Stars and Stripes if I say too much right now. I'll just say we're monitoring the situation, and if it appeared that they were going to launch nuclear weapons, and certainly if they did, there are actions that would be taken. I guess I should probably just leave it at that before I get a angry call.
We love you, Brian. Uh, yeah, thank you, because then I'll have to go back and edit a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I know.
I get what you're saying, and here's the thing, and I think we can all agree on this. Nobody really, very few people, very, very few people anticipated Russia's invasion. Very few
Yeah.
people got this one right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which to me, and I've said this before, like it's a brave new world.
Yes.
2022 is a brave new nothing's off the table anymore. Uh what what do we think is going to happen? Who the hell even knows?
Well,
Anything can happen.
I mean, I wouldn't say anything can happen, but what I would say, I think you're absolutely right that
Don't
we are
jinx
in it.
us. Don't jinx us.
We're in a new world, and what you're seeing right now is history is unfolding
Yeah.
at an accelerated rate. Um, the Well, it goes back to what I was saying, how we used to operate under Moscow rules, and then it became no rules. What we're seeing right now, in my opinion, is the United States, or the West, led by the United States, is attempting to write a new rule book. We're attempting to rewrite the rules for the 21st century and try to get things back on the sort of like Pax Americana track that we want the world to be on. We want to be the global leader. And in order to do that, yes, we are doing some things that are very provocative. They are retaliatory. They're in response to a illegal and immoral invasion of Eastern Europe, but nonetheless, they are provocative. I mean, we have enabled the Ukrainian military to put as many as, probably more than 20,000 Russian soldiers in the ground. We have provided them with billions and billions of dollars of war material and weapon systems. We have directly aided the Ukrainians in targeting and killing Russian military forces. These are very provocative and unprecedented actions. I shouldn't say unprecedented. I mean, we've done proxy warfare before in Angola, in Afghanistan in the 1980s, in Nicaragua, and in places like this. This is on a much larger scale, and the stakes are much higher. And where I really do believe that we are in uncharted waters. This sort of warfare on this scale, like this, it was completely untested until the Kargil conflict of 1999, when India and Pakistan went to war with each other, two nuclear powers. Now you're seeing it happen. I mean, it's like we're staying just beneath that threshold of directly engaging the Russian military. We're keeping that very thin veneer. And you're even seeing like American and British policymakers saying things like, well, if we give weapons to the Ukrainians and they use them to, bomb inside Russia, that's not our problem. Fuck them. Like that's pretty crazy. That's pretty unprecedented, and it is very provocative. And I think that Russia has tried to become a revisionist power. They've openly said we want to create a multipolar world instead of a unipolar world, which is what America wants. And right now you're seeing America trying to slap them back down. And we saw America in the last century slap down many would-be hegemons, the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan. We said no to all of them in one after the other. We're like, no, that's not going to happen. We're going to run things. And right now we're slapping Russia back down to where we feel they should be, a second, if not third rate power. And when we're done there, the long-awaited Pacific pivot may finally happen. We tried that like 10 years ago and it didn't work. Maybe we'll try it again.
We saw Pelosi visit Taiwan.
Right.
And it seemed we were all holding our breath again, weren't we? We watched one of the largest Chinese buildups in that region ever. The Chinese were pretty pissed. They were pretty pissed about her visit, and we all kind of got ramped up. And then after the Russian issue, and then this, we talked about Taiwan last season. It does seem like Taiwan might be heating up again in that region, the whole 9 yards. What, are we seeing this? We're going to see a shift, a pivot, a movement back towards China and Taiwan, or
I think so. I think that it's already very much on the radar. Jim Mattis, his first trip as Secretary of Defense was to Asia. He was sending a signal that this is our new battlefield, or so to speak, this is our new security concern. With Taiwan, it's going to continue to be an issue, and Ukraine changes things in some regards. The Chinese have always held off an invasion of Taiwan for a variety of reasons. One of them certainly being the repercussions, the international implications of doing that. And China is obviously a commercial country with commercial interests. The United States and the West in general is a very large marketplace for China. The last thing they want to see is that dry up. If there is diminished GDP growth within China domestically, it undermines the legitimacy of the state. Maybe the only legitimacy the People's Republic of China, or the CCP, has is economic growth for its people. You can see what happened with Ukraine, that the world pretty much aligned behind the Western alliance. Some countries are going to cheat, including China. Like, they're going to cheat the sanctions a little bit, but they're not going to buck the system too hard. They're more or less kind of on board with the program and not wanting to buck that too hard. You saw everything from this unprecedented unification behind turning Russia into essentially a pariah state with sanctions. That is the last thing that China wants to have happen. Taiwan is this intense source of national pride for the Chinese. It would legitimize the Chinese government if they could reunify Taiwan with the mainland, right? But is that risk worth the cost that they would incur in doing that? And I would also add that as successful as Putin found out in Ukraine, a successful invasion is not guaranteed by any means. And I think even more so than Russia, maybe. When was the last time China has done an amphibious landing operation or an airborne operation? When was the last time that they ran a complex strategic air campaign? When was the last time they launched expeditionary warfare outside of their own country? We've never really seen them do these things. When was their last real war? Was like 19. It was after Vietnam, after our Vietnam War. There was a war between China and Vietnam, briefly. There's the Sino-China War, or Sino-Indian War. We haven't really seen them. They're not like America, like all over the world, deploying their military forces everywhere. And I think I've brought it up before. There's this great article, I think, in the Wall Street Journal of a Chinese peacekeeping mission. I believe it was in Sudan, and they had one soldier killed in an attack, in an RPG strike. And Chinese social media went crazy. Like, why are our boys in Africa? Why is one of our sons dying in Africa? What was this for? And you really have to wonder, if China did try to invade Taiwan and they start taking tremendous losses, and the United States, the full brunt of the American military, is going to get involved in that sooner or later. And, yeah, we're going to lose people. Americans are kind of, I don't want to say okay, but like we're kind of numb to like we
We're
understand.
used to
So,
it.
yeah, I mean, soldiers die, right? The Chinese people have never really experienced anything like that in living memory. And I think there's a lot of unknown and unanswered questions about how China would respond during a war and how effectively their military forces would actually perform in combat.
Well, that's really what makes this generation of Americans so dangerous is that we're coming out of what 20 years of straight warfare, 20 years of losing people, 20 years of refined techniques, 20 years of investing in warfighting capabilities. I can tell you firsthand as a conventional guy, and I'm sure you can see this as a with your special forces and ranger lineage. Uh, the special forces ranger and the typical army soldier are not the same from the year 2000, what you were issued, the gear that you were given, the stuff the way you were trained versus the kid who's graduating Q course today, the guy who just finished ranger school, the guy who just finished infantry school. These are not the same guys. This is not the same equipment. This is not the same training. Today's warfighter is 1,000 times deadlier than the guy from 20 years ago. And the evolution has been ridiculously fast and precise.
The culture also changed quite a bit. If you
Yeah.
talk to SF guys from like the 70s, 80s, 90s, they were more into the unconventional warfare and foreign internal defense mindset. They were more about like finessing things and working in the background, and um, they were I'd say a lot more patient. My generation of guys became, like we're getting big in the gym. We're gonna kick in some doors and we're gonna fucking hash out some shit with some bad actors in the streets of Baghdad and Mosul and Ramadi and wherever else. I mean, we were the go to war like kill some bad guys generation, and many criticized our obsession with direct action operations at the expense of all of our other missions and tasks that we had. So yeah, the culture has changed quite a bit.
And I think the American culture has changed with it, right?
Oh yeah.
I think that the culture in America is very pro military. It's continued to be pro military. Where I hate to say it, but we're kind of used to losses. We're used to it. We see it. We're like, oh, that sucks. And people really do feel for it. But it is not the type of reaction you would see in China where it's like you lose one guy and they're like, what are we doing? Now it's like, well, it's going to take it's going to take some bigger numbers to really shake this country, especially if we feel that the mission is noble. If there is a noble cause, a justification for us doing this, it is very likely America jumps behind it and that support will be there. So, I mean, this is just the generation of American warfighter you don't want to get smoke from. Like you don't want none of this right now. Uh
Yeah,
Probably the best time to fight would be now.
something I think about once in a while is people say like, oh, America, there I know you've heard them too. There are so many like hand wringers out there, these like bedwetters, like America is weak now, we're feeble, we won't back up anywhere, like we won't do this. It's all the woke military today. And it's just totally divorced from reality. I mean, Americans like to fight. Let's be honest with ourselves. We like to
Yeah.
fight. If the Chinese did make a move on Taiwan, what's going to happen is that the Pacific Fleet is going to start steaming towards Taiwan as quickly as possible. Whether or not they're to get directly involved in combat operations remains to be known, but they would start heading towards the South China Sea. Now, China was more than likely they're going to hammer the Pacific Fleet with ballistic missiles. Can you imagine one of our carriers getting sunk by Chinese ballistic missiles? All hands lost. And I swear to God, we all know it. On 24-hour news, they're going to be broadcasting the pictures of every single sailor that drowned or was killed on that ship with a fluttering American flag behind them.
Yep.
So people say, oh, we'll never go to war over some rocks that are barely visible at high tide in the South China Sea. Well, yeah, you're right. We're not. We're going to go to war over a carrier full of sailors that gets lost. And that's going to be the next 9/11 for us. I mean, Americans will go, I mean, we're not going to back down from that. I mean, come on, you got to understand your culture and understand who we are as Americans. We will go absolutely nuts over that. There will be people calling for like all out war with China at that point. And actually it'll be on our government. We'll have to hold our populace back a little bit and try to reassure and calm them down a little. You remember after 9/11, we were like openly talking about invading the entire Middle East. Like,
yep. Yeah. There's nothing that brings Americans together more than vengeance.
Yeah.
Really, 9/11, vengeance. I mean, we wanted our blood.
Yeah.
And we were going to get it. I completely agree with you. I completely agree with that. We may not fight for Taiwan, but we'll definitely fight for a ship that went down with our sailors. We'll fight for our guys. But we'll see how that rolls, man. So we are wrapping it up, folks. This is our season finale. Was NATO and Nukes. We have talked a lot this season about Russia, Ukraine. We talked about cryptocurrency. We're still waiting for Jack's weed coin to go public. We'll let you know when that comes out. You can invest in it. I promise you, it is not a pyramid scheme, folks. It's a multi-level marketing idea that can help you raise money for your friends and family. That's all it is. We talked about Michael Frode, the tragic death of Michael Frode, a U.S. Army human intelligence collector who was working with very special programs. We talked about Andrew Milburn, who is the former deputy commander of Special Operations Central and his Mozart group working in Ukraine to train Ukrainians, which a fascinating story, not just because of who this man is, but of the mission that he's really kind of thrown himself into.
Andy's still over there right now.
There you go. And we talked a little bit about corrupt contracts, children falling out of windows. And again, we try to hammer this season how crappy American military housing is. I wanted to quickly touch on that because I don't know if you've been watching the news as it relates to the U.S. housing market. I don't know how true this is. So again, this is for Brian. I don't know how true this is, but I've heard that there are families living in trailers because they can't get into military housing due to the lack of military housing and the skyrocketing rent and housing prices. So they can't live off post because they literally can't afford it. They can't get BAH high enough, quickly enough to match these rental rates. So they're living in trailers or they're just pretty much homeless, waiting for on-post housing to open up to them.
That's surreal.
That's insane. That's absolutely crazy. Now, I haven't talked to anybody personally. Again, this is what I've heard. But I will tell you that I have seen firsthand high-ranking enlisted guy waiting for a house, living in an apartment that is unsustainable for his family. Unsustainable. This guy served his country for almost 20 years. He's done well for his country, and we're waiting for months to get on-post housing because whatever's out here in the civilian sector, you literally can't afford. And I will tell you, my wife is a real estate agent out here in Florida. These homes are insanely marked up. I mean, we're talking about like ridiculous prices. Rent I don't understand how anybody's paying rent right now. Like the rental prices are insanity.
I know. I live in New York City, man, and yeah, exactly that. And you have to wonder like how long before the entire system just collapses on itself.
We're watching the prices roll back a little bit. The market is kind of simmering down, but not by a whole lot, folks. So my concern here has been, you've already got these crappy government contracts for these crappy government houses, and you know they know what the deal is. They're like, hey, baby, you got nowhere else to go. You got to come to me. I'm the only game in town. I'll take care of you. I promise. Hope your kids don't get cancer and die. I mean, this is the world we live in. And here's I've said this before. Unfortunately, the episodes that do the least, more people are interested about Ukraine and nukes than they are about military housing. But folks, you got to get out there and say something. I mean, this is absolutely crazy. And then we talked a little bit more about Russia, Ukraine, and thank God we didn't hear a lot more stories of people going to Ukraine to fight. I think we got our point across. I think a lot of people woke up to the idea that they're not 24. They're not going to go get out their old BDUs and their web gear and jump on the first thing smoke into Kiev. Uh, so I think we did our community service there by preventing
Our PSA.
our PSA. Don't go fight in Ukraine for the love of God. Let let Andy Milburn and his crew do their job. But was there any story here that stood out to you, Jack?
Man, I mean, they all do in different ways, right? And I think they're all important and relevant. I have a quick plug. The Michael Frode story. I spent a lot of time on that, and I also for the other podcast that I do, the Team House, I interviewed his ex-wife recently, Kate. Had her on to talk about the whole thing. Yeah, that's one that sticks with you. I was telling somebody about that today, actually, that Michael's story. It's a tough one.
That was a tough one. As a humaner, that's a story that I shared with my own reserve guys because that's family. Um, this is something you don't really see in a lot of other MOSs. You see that in infantry where it's like, hey, for an infantryman, I'm an infantryman. We're all brothers in that MOS. The intel world is a little weirder. We're a little more, I don't know, cutthroaty, but in human, there's always this rivalry between us and counter intel guys, the CI dudes. But I love them. I love my CI brothers and sisters. I love my humaners. And to see that the tragedy unfold, and a tragedy that it feels like it could have been prevented. It feels like there could have been things done. Um, it always goes back to if you need help, say something. Go get help. Don't do anything. I know it's crass to say crazy, but don't do anything that's I guess you don't do anything you can't come back from. You know, don't do anything you can't come back from. If you're upset, write me a strongly worded email. Trust me, I get plenty of those. But folks, I just want to thank everybody listening to this fast take that once again has not been fast. We need to rename these. We need maybe these are like I don't know, extra
Hot
take
takes.
or something. Hot takes because fast, they're never fast. But I want to thank everybody that has been listening, all of our subscribers, all of our listeners. Thank you so much for the support. We've been doing this for a couple of seasons now, and you guys have really made this possible. That we're about to go into pre-production for season 6. Season 6. Let's all hope that no more countries get invaded between now and then. So Jack and I can actually focus on putting a theme for the season.
I can do a deep
I'm gonna
dive on
ask.
North Korea next.
Oh God, well, if we say that out loud, knock on wood, that means North Koreans are going to start acting up, and next season is going to be all about North Korea. But Seriously, if you have any story ideas, anything you want to talk to us about, we are on social media where you can always go and find Jack lurking in the Twitterverse, Jack Murphy, RGR. You can find me, Rod Pod Rod. You can find us at Stripes MM Pod. Feel free to email us at militarymatters@stripes.com. Send us your story ideas. Send us your, if you have a tip, if you want us to look into something, please let us know. We're very interested. And as always, huge thanks to my partner in crime over here, Jack Murphy. Team House Talk, always a great podcast to listen to after you've listened to Military Matters. All right. But of course, Jack, thank you so much for all the hard work you put into the season as well, man.
Yeah, thank you, man. It's a good time, and I mean, it's always exciting and cool all the different people I get to talk to in the process of this.
That's one of the best parts of this job, isn't it? Like, I would never have gotten a chance to talk to, NATO experts, nuclear policy guys, families who are really hurting about their housing, trying to make a difference. Like, that's one of the cool things about this job is you get to talk to some really cool people and hear some good stories.
I have the most insane conversations with people on a daily basis, and unfortunately, I only get to share like maybe 5% of them.
And folks, don't forget, you can always, if you have an issue with anything, just hashtag blame Jack Murphy. I am starting this trend. I want you all to jump on it. Just hashtag blame Jack Murphy. Folks, I'm Rod Rodriguez. That was Jack Murphy. This is Military Matters Season 5. That's a wrap. Thank you for listening. And Brian, we apologize. Brian is our editor who has to listen to every episode and tell us what we have to cut, what we can't say, and when to bleep us out. So, Brian, thank you so much for all of your work on this. And that's it. We're out. We will see you at Season 6. This episode is brought to you by Tektogear, TEKTOGEAR.com, a Portland, Maine-based tactical knife company. The knives are created by the CNC process to provide the best precision, functionality, and beauty. The Tektogear knives won't cost you half a month's rent either. Today, Tektogear is giving 15% off the entire purchase. Go to TEKTOGEAR.com. Use discount code STRIPES. That's STRIPES. Go to tektogear.com and use discount code STRIPES and save 15% off your entire purchase.